Hamza Yousaf is suggesting introducing an additional higher tax band for higher earners. What do you make to that one as well? Good idea or not? Should we perhaps follow suit? And our diversity targets within organisations, essentially opportunities basically for companies to discriminate against white men. Yes, we are going to have some robust debate on all of that. But before we get stuck in, let's cross live to Polly Middlehurst for tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you and good evening to you. Let's begin this bulletin with some breaking news that we're getting from South Wales Police. A body has been found following an explosion on an industrial estate in South Wales. Searches were carried out yesterday and today at the site after one person was unaccounted for. Formal identification hasn't taken place. Officers are, though, supporting the family of a person who had been reported missing. Police saying there were no other reports of any serious injuries. And the force now adding they will begin investigating the cause of that fire and indeed the explosion. Now, police are saying there are some indications of why a woman in Norwich may have left her work earlier than usual on the day she went missing. Gaynor Lord was last spotted on CCTV cameras on Friday afternoon. Norfolk Constabulary say it's likely the 55-year-old has entered the water and they've got underwater search teams continuing to scour a body of nearby water. The force saying specialist divers, though, are working in extraordinarily difficult conditions and they will take a couple of days or longer to complete that search.
So there's a number of lines of inquiry that we are pursuing, but at the moment everything that we know is pointing to a high probability that Gaynor went into the water. And that would be from the CCTV, from the very limited witnesses that we've got available to us at the moment, and other lines of inquiry that we're pursuing about Gaynor's behaviour in the lead up to her disappearance. So at the moment the river is a really key factor for us. Now, it's not to say that other specialist police teams aren't working on other lines of inquiry, because they are, but at the moment you're seeing that intensive effort around the searching of the water and the parks around and some of the other land around this area.
And Greater Manchester Police have confirmed a possible sighting of a missing British boy who's believed to have disappeared 6 years ago in France. The police said there'd been a sighting of Alex Batty near Toulouse yesterday. Now a teenager, the boy was just 11 years old when he went missing in 2017 as he left the UK for a holiday in Spain. Greater Manchester Police saying it is now in touch with the French authorities and they're putting safeguarding measures in place. Now, as you've been hearing today, the Bank of England has held the interest rate at 5.25% for the third time in a row, amid signs of potential economic challenges. It comes as the Monetary Policy Committee previously raised the interest rate 14 consecutive times until it reached its 15-year high of the current rate, 5.25. At Parliament's Treasury Committee meeting last month, the bank's governor said the threat of UK inflation is being underestimated. But the Prime Minister said progress has been made.
I've made a bunch of decisions, making sure that we don't borrow too much money, making sure that we're responsible with the public finances so that we can get inflation down. It doesn't happen by accident, and the contrast is quite clear. You've got the Labour Party saying they want to borrow £28 billion a year on this green spending spree. All that's going to do is push up people's taxes, push up mortgage rates. We want to get them down, and that's why in January we're starting to cut people's taxes as well. That will help put more money in people's pockets starting at the beginning of January. So look, I think we are making progress. There's more to do, but the economy has certainly turned a corner.
Rishi Sunak speaking there. But the Shadow Business and Trade Secretary Jonathan Reynolds said the government shouldn't be taking credit for halving inflation.
Inflation target for the United Kingdom is 2%. Inflation coming down is really to do with some of those global pressures changing, supply chains adjusting to what we've seen. And I think people will look at it and say, well, when inflation rose so significantly, the government said nothing to do with us, it's the war in Ukraine, it's these global pressures, and when those recede they want the credit for it coming down. I don't think the British people will be convinced of that case.
Jonathan Reynolds. Now, 2 nurses from Blackpool in Lancashire are both facing prison sentences after they were found guilty of illegally sedating their patients. 54-year-old Catherine Hudson has been given 7 years and 2 months for drugging patients at Blackpool's Victoria Hospital between 2017 and 2018. Her 48-year-old colleague, Charlotte Wilmot, was found guilty of encouraging Hudson to drug a patient, and she was sentenced to 3 years behind bars. A second probe into South Wales Police has been launched by a watchdog following a road collision in Cardiff. 16-year-old Kyrie Sullivan and 15-year-old Harvey Evans died after the bike they were riding crashed in Ely in May. The new investigation is focused on complaints made by the boys' families, and it's separate from another investigation into the interactions of police officers with the teenagers before their deaths. The father, stepmother and uncle of 10-year-old Sarah Sharif have pleaded not guilty to her murder. The 10-year-old's body was discovered at her home in Surrey in August. The day before she was discovered, the 3 defendants left the UK for Pakistan with 5 other children before returning a month later. The trial of all 3 will be in September next year. And the funeral for former Minister Baroness Kinnock has taken place. The family of the MEP and wife of ex-Labour leader Lord Kinnock say she was a proud democratic socialist who campaigned for justice and against poverty all her life. She was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease in 2017. Sir Keir Starmer described her as a true fighter for the Labour Party. He was seen arriving at her funeral earlier, followed by Gordon Brown, Tony Blair and Sadiq Khan. That's the news on GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Thanks for that, Polly. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, I've got the Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Kent, Matt Goodwin, and the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. Good evening, gentlemen, to both of you. And you know the drill, don't you, on this programme? It's not just about us 3. It is about you guys at home. What is on your mind tonight? I've got a packed show. I want to get through a lot with you. I want to ask you, are Israel losing international support? That's what Joe Biden says. Do you agree with that? I also want to talk about whether or not Scotland need yet another tax ban, this time affecting the higher earners there. Do we need to get those people to pay more money or not? And all of this diversity stuff, do you reckon it's got to the point now where basically white men are essentially getting discriminated against or not? We'll get stuck into all of that throughout the programme. Get in touch with me, as I said, all the usual ways. But for now, let's talk politics, shall we? Because you might be familiar by now with the fact that the independent MP, Scott Benton, he lost the Tory whip, didn't he? I think back in April. He's now facing potential suspension from Parliament. The Standards Committee have recommended a 35-day suspension. This, of course, is to do with that undercover meeting that he had, essentially, where he was, many would argue, quite seriously breaching lobbying rules. I think I might have a clip of that. Let me just see. I'll play you that.
He votes in House Commons 2 or 3 times a day. The Minister has to pass you, and then you've got 10 minutes while you walk around to the next vote to have his ear. There's written questions as well, where we can table things on the public record and get an instant response within 5 working days. And thirdly, we have access to papers and information which PR.
Well, it's not great, is it? So obviously, there was more where that came from. And I think, got to say, I think it's quite disappointing for his area, a part of Blackpool. I think it was the first time that particular area had appointed a Tory MP. The fellow was only appointed in 2019, so he didn't seem to be wasting much time when it comes to getting involved in antics like that. But anyway, if we do indeed have a by-election, it's got me thinking now, we've had quite a few by-elections since 2019. Do you think there should be a mechanism whereby if we keep having these by-elections, essentially, a general election needs to be forced?
I don't think that would be a great idea. I think by-elections always come and go, and the most recent ones for Rishi Sunak have been terrible. We've seen these historic swings at by-elections that we haven't really seen before in British history. I think what this is going to do is pile pressure on Rishi Sunak to call that election. I think another bad performance is not going to go down very well at all among Conservative MPs. They're all very anxious. They've been telling me this week they're very anxious about losing their seats. A lot of those 2019ers in areas like this seat are currently forecast to lose their seats next year. So I think, the broader picture here, Michelle, is a Prime Minister, I think, who's basically coming undone. Today in the papers, Rishi Sunak's popularity is now at the lowest point it's ever been. He's as unpopular now as Boris Johnson was in his final days. He's lost every by-election, really, that's happened under his premiership, and they're still 20 points adrift of Labour in the national polls. So this is basically the last thing Rishi Sunak needed. And if anything, it's probably going to give us another heavy Conservative defeat.
What do you make to it, Aaron?
Well, I agree on the point with regards to by-elections. I think as long as you've got you can command a majority of confidence in the House, you should be able to form a government, and that's our system. Everybody was saying, well, if they lose the Rwanda vote, then we probably should have a general election. I would have agreed with that. However, he came through. He has a majority of Parliament in terms of one of his major flagship issues, which is, of course, Rwanda. So I agree with what Matt said there. What I would say as well, though, is Blackpool is one of those parts of the country that really needs top people representing it.
It does.
And it has, quite frankly, in the shape of Scott Benton, a charlatan as far as I can see. Maybe somebody needs to make the counter-argument, I don't know, but that seems quite clear to me.
Obviously, he's not here to defend himself,
Yes.
and he would absolutely say, I'm not a charlatan.
Yes. I would argue that given what we've seen and given that investigation, he probably isn't that committed to public service. And it's a great shame for the people of Blackpool. And like you said, it's the first time I think they've picked a Tory to represent them in that particular constituency, if not ever, for a very long time. And of course, that is manna from heaven for the Labour Party, because they can say, well, look, you chose not to go with us, and look what happened. And look, I'm on the left. I don't want to see a one-party stay in any constituency, because then people are taken for granted. So it's a great shame. And this is why I support proportional representation. We need more than simply two parties in politics, of this Punch and Judy between the likes of Scott Benton on the Tory benches, or Jared Amara, of course, the disgraced Labour MP who was basically defrauding the House of Commons in terms of apparently doing things he wasn't doing so he could get more expenses. So we can do so much better than people like Mr Benton.
And I actually do. I used to spend a fair amount of time in Blackpool as a teenage girl. I'll leave it to the viewer's imagination what used to go on there. It was a very
good night out.
It was a very good night out from the bits that I can remember, I must confess. But I feel quite sorry for those kind of areas, because for a lot of people, not all, but for a lot of people, it would have taken perhaps a bit of a hold of the nose to go Tory for the first time.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of people there perhaps would have had, oh, shall we, shan't we, reservations and all the rest of it. So when that then happens to those people, it's really not acceptable. And it makes me feel, when we talk about the turnout in politics and how many people are politically disengaged, these kind of things, not only is it a shame for his constituents, but much broadly for UK politics.
Well, I agree with you. It's not just that they got a bad MP, it's also that they didn't really get anything that Boris Johnson and the Conservatives promised at the last election. I am in a different political space to Aaron, but actually we probably agree on this point, that when you look at levelling up, you know, revitalising all of those areas outside of London and the big cities, didn't really happen. It wasn't a serious, sustained policy intervention. You look at immigration, they wanted less immigration in areas like Blackpool. They got historic rates of net migration of the kind we've never seen before. They wanted Brexit to be a big, bold, ambitious new experiment, building a different economy, one that works for areas like Blackpool. Didn't really happen. Financial services, once again prioritised. London, once again put before everywhere else. So I think what we are going to see in areas like Blackpool, and on current polling, by the way, every Red Wall seat will go back to Labour. What we are going to see in these areas is a lot of people basically saying, we took a punt in 2019, it didn't work out, we're going to go back to Labour, just get these guys out of number 10, we want somebody different. And that is a real tragedy, because I think, you know, where maybe Aaron and I would depart is I think under a Labour government too, I don't think these areas are actually going to get much better over the longer term. No one has cracked this issue of regional inequality. No one really has cracked the riddle of how to revitalise growth outside of London and outside of the South East. So I'm really sorry for the people of Blackpool, because I think they deserve so much better.
Yeah, and these kind of like seaside kind of places, they did used to be absolutely thriving, but a lot of them, they have just been kind of like just totally left to rack and ruin. I just do. I have great memories. They're making me smile and blush simultaneously, but I have great memories of my teenage years in Blackpool. I really do. Not just Blackpool, places like Skegness, Bridlington, Scarborough, whatever. All the kind of seasidey places that now when you go there, they're a little bit, and I don't mean to offend any viewers that live there, but they've almost just become like a bit of a dumping ground like you say, for the migrants because of the cheap housing costs there, etc., and boarded up shops and neglected areas. Do you think they would thrive better under Labour?
Well, it's not just migrants. People on housing benefit. You know, it's basically somewhere now where local authorities from other parts of the country go there because it's so cheap. And I'll respond to that question. But Blackpool, I should say, gorgeous beach, beautiful Victorian architecture. There's no reason why it shouldn't be a success story. It's a political failure. That is not inevitable what's happening there. On the Labour point, look, I agree. Places like Blackpool were completely taken for granted by Labour and the sort of political class before Brexit. And if it achieved nothing else, it made Labour feel they have to now fight for every single vote in places they considered really, you know, they can take them for granted. Will they change somewhere like Blackpool? I think we need such a profound disruption in regards to how we run our economy, our society, our politics. I suspect we won't. Will it be marginally better than the last 5 years? Look, I think almost certainly, given what's happened with inflation and whatnot. They would struggle to do a worse job than what we've seen really since 2019. Although, to be fair to the Tories, partly for reasons beyond their control, like Ukraine and COVID.
Are you in Blackpool? Are you in the seats we're just discussing where your MP has actually been accused of doing this? I'd love to know, how do you feel? Were you perhaps one of those first-time Tory voters? Did you lend your vote to the Tories? And if so, how do you feel when you see stories like this? Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.com is how you get a hold of me. I want to talk to you after the break about Israel, the situation we'll all be familiar with Gaza by now. Joe Biden, he's come out and said that Israel is losing international support because of their approach when it comes to Gaza. Is he right? Do you agree with him or not? Tell me why.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life: your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet?
What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie, second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, the Professor of Politics and International Relations at the University of Kent, Matt Goodwin, and the co-founder of Novara Media, Aaron Bastani. We've just been talking about the Blackpool South MP, of course, that's lost the Tory whip. Matt said, I live in Blackpool, and I do agree with your comments, Michelle. The High Street is a shadow of its former self, but it needs far more investment than it's getting. Scott has let us down in Blackpool South, where I live. Margaret says, don't write Blackpool off so quickly. There is so much going on. There's huge hotel investment, she says. Marco Pierre White opening a restaurant in town, etc. So that's good. I like the fact that you think your town is on the up. That's what I want. But I just worry that perhaps other people, certainly people in politics, perhaps don't share the visions for those areas that I would say perhaps they should. Anyway, look, Joe Biden, he has been talking out about Israel. He's been suggesting that it's starting to lose international support over its basic bombing campaign of Gaza. I also noticed as well the Israeli ambassador to the UK, she was speaking out. Let's just listen to what she had to say.
I think it's about time for the world to realise the Oslo paradigm failed on the 7th of October, and we need to build a new one. And in order to build a new one...
Does that new one include the Palestinians living in a state of their own? Is that what it includes?
I think the biggest question is what type of Palestinians are on the other side. This is what Israel realised on the 7th of October.
Though?
The answer is absolutely no, and I'll tell you why.
Well, then
because
how can
at
there
the
be
moment,
peace
no.
Well, Rishi Sunak, he was basically speaking out about the same issue. Listen.
That a two-state solution is the right outcome here, and more immediately, you know, what's going on is incredibly concerning.
Let me start with you on this one, Matt. Let's kind of go to the top level about what Joe Biden was saying about Israel losing international support. Do you agree with that?
I'm not sure, actually. I think it depends, firstly, on what country you're talking about and who you're surveying. Look, my view on this is Israel has every right to do what it needs to do in order to secure its own safety, the safety of its citizens, and it needs to dismantle the Islamist terrorist organisation Hamas. So that's the starting point. Any discussion about two-state solutions, the future of Gaza, so on, has to come after that point. And the other thing, Michelle, is, you know, I'm struck by the standard to which we hold Israel, because I don't recall in the aftermath of 9/11 or 7/7 or the atrocities in Paris in 2015, I don't recall us having the same discussions about international support for interventions led by the United States or how we were dealing with terrorists and so forth. But when it comes to Israel, they are constantly held up to this standard. We constantly talk about proportionality in a way that we don't talk about it when it comes to other interventions in countries around the world. What I am concerned about in the papers, by the way, today, is how British Jews feel. And they feel, as the new polling has shown, they feel less safe than they ever have in Britain. They feel less confident in established media. Their support for organisations like the BBC has declined sharply. And they feel, I think understandably, as though very few people are actually on their side and defending them within this sort of public relations battle that we're all having over the conflict. So the starting point and the end point for me, at least at this point, is Israel has every right to do what it needs to do to dismantle Hamas and to give its own people security and safety.
Do you agree with that, Aaron?
No, not at all. I think if you look at the vote in the General Assembly in terms of who supports the ceasefire and who doesn't, 153 countries voted for a ceasefire, 10 against, 23 abstained. Obviously, Israel, the US voted against. They were joined by geopolitical giants such as Guatemala and Liberia. We were joined by geopolitical giants in abstaining like Tonga and Togo. So apart from us and Germany, and of course the US, there's no big countries siding with Israel at the UN. Now, responding to what Matt said about why are we treating Israel differently, the point of Zionism is that Israel wants to be a normal country. And if you're a normal country, you have to be clear about what your borders are. So where are Israel's borders? And that goes back to the point of what Sipi Hateveli was saying about, do you want a two-state solution or not? If Israel has clearly delimited borders and there is a distinct Palestinian state in the West Bank or Gaza, or even just the West Bank or whatever, then I think we can talk about Israel as it's a country responding to something as you'd expect any other country to. That's what makes it different. We don't know what Israel's borders are, and it's that ambiguity which actually gets to the very heart of the problem. Finally, look, there are plenty of people in the Israeli government who actually want to basically expel 2.5 million Gazans. Not everyone, not Netanyahu, but people in that government, and they want them to go to Egypt. And the Egyptians have said that they would just send them to Europe. So when people are watching this saying, well, look, this is interesting, it's obviously bad, I sympathise with Israel or the Gazans or both or whatever, it also is of importance to Europe because we're looking at potentially 2.5 million people coming to Europe as refugees, maximum. That's not likely, but it's up to 2.5 million people. And if nothing else, our foreign policy in this country should be about how do we minimise the number of displaced people in our near abroad coming into Europe as refugees, because people in Europe and in the UK don't want more refugees. And it's almost like our foreign policy is about how can we create as many refugees as possible. And so I think common sense here really is a ceasefire, a two-state solution. And I think Zippy Hateveli speaking... Please.
It's very easy, though, to say ceasefire, two-state solution. You know full well, firstly, that a ceasefire, the one thing that will do, foremost, is allow Hamas to regroup and to continue as a terrorist organisation.
Well,
so what do we do
about the two-state solution.
What do we do with Hamas?
Sure.
How do we dismantle Hamas?
Sure.
That's the starting point.
The starting point is Israel needs to recognise that there is a strong case and an arguable case for a two-state solution. As long as you have... And she is a diplomat. This is not some gunslinger for an Israeli newspaper. She's a diplomat. She's speaking on behalf of the Israeli government. As long as you have people like her saying we cannot have a two-state solution, this isn't going away.
Would you want to live next door? Would you want to live literally next door to a collection of people that are very intent on destroying your innocent civilians?
I would want strong, internationally recognised borders, if necessary, militarised borders. The point is there aren't borders. We don't know if those Palestinians are in Israel or if they're not in Israel because Israel won't recognise the state of Palestine. That would be, for me, the starting point. And you can say we want a demilitarised zone in Gaza. I think that probably makes sense. The West Bank less so. But you have to accept the necessity of a two-state solution. And the fact that you've got a senior Israeli diplomat suggesting no. And look, Biden said the exact same thing the night before. The problem with this particular government is they don't want a two-state solution. Previous administrations have done. It's a major, major problem. You cannot get a solution to this. You cannot get a solution to this without that.
You can't get any solution until you completely dismantle the terrorist organisation called Hamas. That's the starting point. The starting point was the atrocities committed on October 7th. So we can have a discussion about a two-state solution, but that conversation has to come. Well, as the IDF said today, Hamas can begin this process by surrendering. The remaining fighters can surrender. You can then start to work towards some kind of organisation that is representative of Palestinians, that isn't committed to the murder and genocide of Jews. You can try and bring in other states in the region to try and ensure, a more representative body that can oversee Gaza. And, we say these things like two-state solution. Well, who's running the state?
Well, can I respond to that quickly?
Who's running the state? Because having a violent Islamist terrorist organisation running that state is simply not a proposition that Israel would consider.
I understand that. And that would be a very strong argument if you didn't have in the West Bank the Palestinian Authority, which recognises the state of Israel, running that part of, what would be a Palestinian state in the West Bank that is not run by Hamas. And guess what? Israel is still killing hundreds of people there. So that argument would be watertight were it not for Israeli attacks on West Bank. Combine that with what Zippy Hateveli is saying, combine that with what Joe Biden's saying, it's quite clear to me that Israel's stance means there cannot be a solution here. Obviously, Hamas has a plan for October 7th.
It's not only Israel's stance.
Of course it's not. But what she is saying, and that position with regards to the West Bank, shows there cannot be a solution. There cannot be a solution. It's impossible.
But do you think Hamas want this two-state solution to live peacefully, happily ever after, alongside each other?
Well, I'm sure there are some people in Hamas who do, but their leadership broadly don't. And I think that's a really good point. But then which brings us back to the West Bank. They're run by the Palestinian Authority. The Palestinian Authority, for people watching this, they are not Hamas. They have recognised the state of Israel since the mid-1990s. We had the Oslo Accords in 92-94. They said, we recognise you in response, no more settlements here. Every single day for the last 30 years, there have been new Israeli settlements in the West Bank. And people like Joe Biden or the Labour Party or even the Tories say you can't have more settlements in the West Bank. But they go on and on and on and on because it goes back to what Joe Biden was saying. for a big part of Israeli civil society and this very right-wing government, they want them all out. They do want them all out. We have to be honest about this. There are awful, evil people in Hamas. There are also people in the Israeli government who want to expel millions of people. And again, sensible, pragmatic people in this country say, well, look, sad, not our problem. It is, because they will eventually come to Europe.
I don't think anybody in Britain is saying this isn't our problem. I think a lot of people, thankfully, are very concerned about what has been committed, the atrocities that have been committed against Israel. And I think if you look at the polling on this, a lot of people in Britain have sympathy with Israel's need to secure its own territory and provide security and safety for its own people.
I have sympathy with it.
And
I still think there should be a two-state solution.
Yes, but that, as I say, they're two separate conversations. We can all say ceasefire. We know a ceasefire won't resolve this issue.
I said
and we can all say two-state
ceasefire.
Solution, but we know that that comes after Israel's response to October 7th. It was Hamas that launched the attacks. It was Hamas that murdered
Hamas
and raped
in the West Bank.
And raped. And this is about the conflict and about how we
killing
started.
people in the West Bank. Hamas aren't in the West Bank.
It's not. You're turning this into a separate point.
No, if they were just killing people in Gaza, I'd say fine, but they're not.
The reason this conflict has begun was because of the mass murder, rape and brutality committed by Hamas against Jews.
So why kill people in the West Bank? Hamas aren't in the West Bank. This was an attack from Gaza by Hamas. So why kill people hundreds of miles away in the West Bank?
One of the beginning point to resolving the whole conflict, this whole issue, firstly, is the removal of Hamas.
Who aren't in the West Bank.
But a lot of them aren't even in Gaza. A lot of the leaders of Hamas are not even in Gaza.
No, quite.
But, I mean, are we any further to getting the answer to the resolution to the situation? Do you think that the UK was right to abstain from the UN? So what we was talking about, Aaron was just referencing the UN General Assembly. They had a vote, basically, about whether or not, essentially, to have a ceasefire. The UK abstained from that. Do you think they should have done?
I think so, yes. I think it's very easy to say, let's have a ceasefire without thinking through what that actually means. A ceasefire, look, nobody in Britain or elsewhere is condoning and cheering on what is happening in Gaza. Everybody, I think, of sound mind thinks it's absolutely horrific, and the loss of life is beyond words and what we've seen coming out of Gaza. But at the same time, it's very easy for people to say, let's have a ceasefire without thinking through the practical implications of that, the most important of which is you essentially allow the organisation which committed the atrocities on October 7th to regroup, and you make it less likely that Israel will be able to secure its own territory and provide safety to its own people. So, you know, it's easy to throw these words around. It's less easy to think through the consequences and what that will entail for Israel.
What do you guys make to it at home? I mean, one thing is for certain, isn't it? There's just more and more people getting killed every single day, most of whom are, of course, innocent people. What is the answer to it then? Do you have one in mind? Do you know what on earth we do? One of my viewers here, Cynthia, says a two-state solution is nonsense and an absolute non-starter. Brian says we should support Israel 100%. Keep your thoughts coming in on that one. After the break, I want to talk to you about taxes. Do you think that the higher earners should be made to pay even more income tax? That's an idea being floated in Scotland. Should we follow suit?
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show.
Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else.
We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride.
Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse.
It's news, but it's this close to entertainment.
Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News,
Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Matt Goodwin and Aaron Bastani remain alongside me. There's really mixed opinions on the Israel topic that we were just discussing. Really, honestly, really mixed and mixed. Some people say continue to support Israel, come what may. Other people saying things like, if anyone says support Israel, come what may, would they sit down with a mother who's just lost all of their children, who are all innocent, and explain why that was all about justified self-defence? So again, you really are divided on that one at home. Should we talk tax? Over in Scotland, they're perhaps planning to introduce a new tax band for higher earners. This is because they reckon there's a black hole basically in Scotland's finances. Some have put a figure on it at about £500 million. Over in Scotland, they've already got a tax system that's more complicated than the one in England. They've got additional bans already. But as a principle, where are you on this, Matt?
I don't think it's the right move, and I don't think it's the right move for Scotland, by the way. The underlying story is basically, I think, a government that's been struggling to run Scotland and pay for public services. We've seen over the last week a number of big business organisations, rightfully in my view, come out and say, firstly, the numbers don't add up on this. It's not going to generate as much revenue as the Scottish First Minister has claimed. And secondly, it's going to encourage a lot of people to move south into England, where already, were they living in England, they'd be paying less tax. Now, this is actually what we saw ahead of the 2019 general election, when a lot of people were getting ready for what they feared would be a Jeremy Corbyn government. We saw a lot of high earners, a lot of more affluent individuals planning to essentially relocate their assets elsewhere or leave the country. So no, I don't think this is the right move for Scotland at all.
Do you, Aaron?
As a point of principle, I think basically anybody earning less than 100,000 shouldn't be paying more in income tax. I think there are so many places you can collect more money. Capital gains, I think, should be higher. You want to equalise it with wealth, because, of course, the very wealthiest people make money through capital. And so I think, taxing incomes is not necessarily the smartest thing to do. I actually think Labour in the last election made a big mistake there. They should have just said, look, if you're on less than 100k, you won't be paying a penny more. I think somebody on, say, 75k having to pay more...
Why is 100k your magic figure?
Just an arbitrary number. It's quite a lot of money, isn't it, realistically? I think somebody on 75,000 having to pay more income tax, that person has probably seen their mortgage go up, energy bills, food, council tax. Although I should say, in the SNP's defence, they are doing this partly because they want to freeze council tax. And, of course, in England, council tax went up last year. And in addition to that, of course, in Scotland, they don't have university tuition fees. And in my paycheck, you know, quite a lot goes out actually in that. And what's catastrophic with regards to this, and this is probably something that maybe if you're a little bit older, you're not aware of, post-2012 student loans were RPI plus 3%. Of course, RPI last year was about 13%. Such a daft way of financing student loans. So people were looking at basically credit card debt style interest rates. Of course, the government had to cap it at about 7-8%. So that isn't in Scotland either. However, on principle, I think raising income tax is not the smartest thing to do. They would respond, well, where else are we going to get the money from?
And you'd say capital gains?
Yeah, but they would, I suppose they can't, that probably isn't a competence they have. You know.
Let me ask you this, and don't get offended when I ask this question at home, because you go, oh, Michelle, what are you doing? Why are you putting ideas into people's heads? That's it, I'm never going to watch your programme ever again. But a lot of people's primary residence have increased massively, and of course the capital gain there is completely tax-free. Should it be?
It's such a hard one. I think, again, in principle, you think it should be. It's a home. I get that. But then sometimes the numbers are so astronomical and people are being hit in so many other places. I see the argument for it. I think we really need a big rethink on capital gains. If it was me, I'd reduce VAT to about 15%. I'd probably get rid of a bunch of exemptions except food. And I'd, bring up capital gains. I know, you know...
But would you apply it to primary residence? That's my question.
I think you look at some of the homes being sold in places like London and you think there's a really strong argument for it. And then you've got places like Blackpool really struggling. We talked about it earlier on. So that is an important redistribution of wealth from London to parts of the country that really need it. But again, it's one of those, I can understand it's your home. I totally get it. On this, though, it's just to finish, because I've said a lot, it's just like inheritance tax. You know, the very wealthiest people, they don't pay it. So the idea that, oh, well, we'll tax the rich, it's a little bit more complicated than that. That's why I'd rather increase capital gains.
There is, just briefly on that, there is an interesting broader point here, which is how Scotland is governed, right? And if you look at the polling, you look at what's going to happen at the election next year, which I think will see a big Labour resurgence in Scotland. I think the SNP are clearly struggling. I think Humza Yousaf is clearly struggling in the polls. But the proposition that Scotland can thrive and prosper independent from the rest of the UK, I don't think is plausible anymore.
Why?
Firstly, it just doesn't have enough money. It's too reliant on the rest of the UK for fiscal transfers. It doesn't have the growth. It doesn't have the dynamism. To be honest, it doesn't really have the leadership that it needs. And I think in this post-Brexit era, where we've seen lots of voters have, rightly or wrongly concluded that whether you voted Leave or Remain, the process was prolonged and difficult. I think this is just going to add to this sense in Scotland that independence is just not really a serious, viable proposition.
But a lot of supporters of independent Scotland will say, well, actually, yes, we want to be independent from the UK, but we want to be part of the EU again.
Yeah, but I mean, firstly, whether the EU is even going to allow that to happen, given other tensions in Spain and other parts of Europe, giving a green light to separatists, I don't think is in the EU's interest. I think, secondly, that's a long process. I think adjusting Scotland, presumably, to adopt the euro and all the rest of it, I think is going to be a very difficult situation. But fundamentally, in terms of, is Scotland a viable economic proposition, an independent Scotland, I think this is another example of why it isn't, actually. The SNP have been struggling not just with tax, Michelle, but just to run schools, run the NHS,
this is very
run
true.
basic public services. If you compare the quality of public services in places like Scotland, Wales versus England, people living there are having a very different, often worse experience than their counterparts in England.
Well, yeah, they've been struggling with a lot of stuff, not least to define clearly what a woman is, but don't get me started on that one. Anyway, what do you make to this? Linda said, talk about creating a brain drain and completely relaxing the amount of investment that goes into the country. You know what? I have a little theory. I don't think anyone should be able to raise taxes anymore without demonstrating to us already that the money that you've already got, you are spending effectively and efficiently, and you've got rid of as much waste as possible. Only then should you be looking at us taxpayers to help fund your coffers. What do you say to that? Anyway, let's talk discrimination after the break. This whole drive for equality and diversity and all the rest of it, do you think it's actually now reached the point where it's discriminating against the white man? You tell me.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth. It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Dewbs & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Ah!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry till 7. Aaron Bastani, Matt Goodwin remain alongside me. Lindsay said, I'm absolutely against the tax raising in Scotland. She lives in Scotland. She's basically saying, what, I pay a fortune in tax, what do I get? A broken NHS, we have to attend privately. She's saying that the government mismanages the funds that it's already got. So she's asking, why on earth should she have to pay more? Lots of people offended by it was just a mere suggestion, stimulating debate, asking the question about whether or not capital gains should be applied to primary residents. I've got to say, most of you say no. And you say a few other things as well, and I can take it, don't worry. Let's talk about diversity next, shall we? Because Aviva, they're basically an insurance company, as you'll be familiar with. Now they're trying to, what they say, stamp out sexism from the financial services industry. They've appointed a new CEO. And now what she's suggesting is for all senior hires that are non-white, she basically wants to be able to, or non-diverse, should I say, she wants to be able to sign them off, make sure no one's ringing up the mate saying, hey, mate, listen, I can get you this job and all the rest of it. It sounds good on paper, but do you worry, Aaron, that this whole kind of equality, diversity, drive and all the rest of it is essentially just going to mean that white men are going to be pushed out of opportunities or miss out on them?
Yeah. Well, I love the idea that, brown or black people or women aren't ever given a call, say, do you fancy the job? And it's not given out. That only ever happens to white men. I find it strange for a few reasons. Firstly, because she's the CEO. This only, by the way, is about senior hires. So they have about 22,000 employees at Aviva. She's not doing every single applicant. But a CEO broadly should be on top of every single senior person that joins the organisation. The fact that she's only on top of white men joining, I find rather strange. However, I went into this lady's biography a little bit, Amanda Blanc, and she is from a comp. She's from Wales. I was expecting, very affluent, she comes from a well-off background.
Yeah, good on her.
Exactly right. So there's that to it. Because often these kinds of initiatives, if they're driven by people from very affluent, privileged backgrounds, the one thing they don't want to talk about is economics and class. However, she comes from a working-class family in Wales, so I think that's commendable. Look, of course there are problems with regards to sexism and racism in all manner of places, but you need to address those through intelligent systems. The idea that somebody is just asked whether or not you should hire somebody because they're a white male, it's borderline illegal, by the way, because you cannot discriminate unless you have two equally qualified candidates. Then you can do quote-unquote positive discrimination.
Yeah.
But you cannot say, we are only hiring a non-white person. You cannot do that in a recruitment process. So,
well, in a museum near me, which I won't name, but they were hiring, and they said it was for this museum, and they wanted a curator or whatever it was, and they said they want to recruit someone who, get this, identifies as black.
Yeah. I don't know if that's legal.
I don't mean to be funny, but I'll leave it to your imagination what I thought about that. Anyway, Matt.
Yeah. Do you know what I think is interesting about Aaron on this is, even now, a growing number of people on the left have realised that the identity politics insanity that is being pushed by the cultural left has just gone way too far. And what we're seeing here, this is a nice example of what's called woke capitalism, which is the way in which organisations and companies have embraced this DEI religion, diversity, equity, inclusion, and have essentially rewired their organisations around this very divisive identity politics. And what's fascinating for me, Michelle, is now people on the right and the left are coming together and saying, this is just bananas, it's gone way too far. On the right, people struggle with it because they say, we just want the most competent people in the top jobs and we want the values of capitalism to be defended and upheld. But now people on the left are saying, we think this is basically being used to distract attention from class inequality, from economic inequality, from what's going wrong in the financial and economic system. So the bosses, as we saw, by the way, as well with the NatWest banking scandal and how Nigel Farage was treated, the bosses, I think, are actually out of touch with where the country is on this issue, on both the left and the right.
That's right.
I think the biggest diversity that you need in organisations is diversity of thought. I think there's so many people that actually just have the same thought process, and you can do what you want when it comes to skin colour and who sleeps with who and whatever. But if everyone thinks the exact same way, then you're not going to get diversity. You're just not.
Yeah.
And actually what you get is a lot of people being discriminated against because they don't think the same way as this now organised collective say that you should. Anyway, final words.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'll bring the Labour Party in on this because, of course, the Labour Party loves to talk about diversity, and we have lots of brown and black MPs and candidates, which they do. But the point is they tend not to be people who disagree with the leader. And like you say, that's key. You can't say, look, we're open to diversity, but you have to agree with us. You can't disagree, because, of course, that undermines the whole point of diversity, which isn't just a good thing. It actually makes, like you say, organisations stronger. I'll finish with this very quickly, Michelle. I think the major point of privilege in this country is whether or not you live inside the M25, and people are really, really being left behind because of where they live, their economic background, and particularly their lack of proximity to a major city, particularly London. This doesn't capture any of that. And, you know, I think politics has begun to catch up post-Brexit. It's so important. I think finance and business needs to do the same.
You see, I just think you can't be what you can't see. I never even knew that the city, as it's called, was even a thing when I was growing up in Hull. I wish that I did. I'd been right in there with all the men, and I'd have been smashing it as a trader. But all of these young kids that are growing up, if you don't know that those opportunities are indeed available to you, then how do you even go about trying to get yourself in there? One of my viewers, I've just lost your name, which is a real shame because you've made me laugh, and I would like to have given you credit. I think it was Pete, but I might be wrong. You've just said, Michelle, this country has gone from white van man to a white man ban. And I quite like what you did there. Sula says, and I hope I pronounced that right. Yeah, it was Peter that said that. I like it, Peter. Sula says, Michelle, please can you thank your two guests? They are extremely polite and they debate each other clearly and articulately and respectfully. Fantastic viewing, she says.
Aww.
Please say thank you from me. Well, there you go.
Thanks,
I just
Mum.
did. Thanks, Mrs. Goodwin. Anyway, listen.